Good afternoon, and welcome to our session this afternoon on achieving positive results in sustainability transitions. This panel has been organized by UACES, which is the University Association for Contemporary European Studies, which is an organization that brings together approximately 1,400 academics from across the European Union, but also we're reaching out globally now. The seminar this afternoon, the session this afternoon, has received support through the Erasmus Plus program, and we are happy that we are able to be here in the press club. We have with us today a panel of speakers with wide-ranging expertise and experience, able to draw on a number of differing insights in our discussion and consideration of the question how to achieve positive results in sustainability transitions. Our speakers have extensive experience in working in different global settings, including Africa, Asia, and South America, in addition to their European expertise. We are going to proceed with our speakers, beginning with Dr. Richard Elelman, then Martijn Pakker, and then Dr. Rosa Fernandez. I'm delighted to welcome Dr. Richard Elelman, Head of Politics at EURECAT, the major research and technology organization in Catalonia, which is based in Barcelona. He is the founder and director general of the Network for Water in European Regions and Cities. He's a political analyst specializing in environmental and scientific policy and the links between politics, the world of research and development, and citizen engagement. We're very fortunate to have Richard with us today, as he only returned earlier this week from Nairobi, where he has been working with the United Nations as an acting head of division focusing on social engagement. Martijn Pakker has been head of strategic relations and activities with the IEEP, based here in Brussels since January of 2023. Prior to his appointment with the IEEP, Martijn was involved in spearheading partnerships and advocacy for CGIAR research institutions based in the Global South, with a focus on sustainability, agriculture, and public health in the context of the SDGs. His work with the IEEP includes developing the IEEP's European Green Deal Barometer, and earlier this year, he presented the findings of the 2023 barometer during EU Week. Dr. Rosa Fernandez, our panel organizer, has wide teaching and research experience in Spain and the UK. She's currently based in Keele Business School, Keele University, UK, where she is the sustainability lead in the business school. Rosa is an applied economist, specializing in sustainability-related topics, including renewable energies, education for sustainable development, corporate social responsibility, education for sustainable development, poverty, food security, and food sustainability. Her most recent publication is dealing with green fiscal systems, their role in the European Green Deal, in the book by Christina Kurtz and Helene Darage, Making the EGD Work, EU Sustainable Development Policies. I did promise a promotional advert for the book, Rosa. I'll be quiet now and hand over to the first of our speakers, Dr. Richard Elelman. Each speaker has been asked to speak for about 10 to 12 minutes, and then we'll open the floor to questions. Richard?
Okay, thank you very much. I don't know if you can hear this. Yeah, this is good. Okay. So thank you very much for inviting me here today. To dive straight into the subject with regards to sustainable transformation, I think there's a very basic element, which I think most of us, we would agree on, which is the fact that environmental, for example, policies, but also other sustainable policies at supranational, regional, national, subnational, municipal levels, but especially municipal levels, require continuity. And in order to obtain this continuity of successful policies, it's necessary to create trust and also to not only appear transparent, but to be transparent. And those two elements are something which are badly lacking in the political world in which we happen to live at the moment. But those have to be our principal objectives if we are able to guarantee in the future a sustainable transformation of our society. So I would argue that as a political scientist and as a former politician as well, I would argue that what we're talking about here is the necessity to open a far broader debate as well regarding representative versus open government. I mean, we're very much used to placing, shall we say, political responsibility into a small group of people, i.e. politicians, and also administrators, in whom in recent years we don't trust. And so therefore the debate regarding far more open government has come to light. And with regards to the environment, which is basically my speciality, is environmental policy at the supranational level, I believe that the only way that we can truly achieve the goals, for example, of the SDGs, to give an example, or for example, the twin transition to a digital and green economies proposed by the European Commission, the only way that we can achieve that is that supranational strategy is converted into tangible local actions. I have no faith whatsoever in regional organizations. I have no faith whatsoever in national governments, and I have no faith whatsoever in subnational administrations, which are very often set up simply as a means of providing political parties with a further source of income. I do have a faith in supranational strategies, and I do have a faith in the capacity at a local municipal level to really create change. And I think that was first observed starting some 13, 14 years ago with the Covenant of Mayors, which in my opinion is one of the finest programs that's ever come out of the European Commission, whereby originally, I mean, obviously the targets and the names change as we fail to meet those targets, but originally it was designed with regards to energy to create 20% more renewable energy and to increase by 20% energy efficiency, whilst at the same time reducing by 20% CO2 emissions in municipalities. That, funnily enough, was called the 20-20-20 strategy. That's now become the 30-30-30 strategy. And I've got a couple of bets with more than one friend that that's going to become the 50-50 strategy pretty quickly, because we're not going to make it before 2030. But what that demonstrated was the Covenant of Mayors was very important, was because for the first time, it placed municipalities, no matter what their size, not only just the large major cities, but also towns and villages and hamlets around Europe. It placed them in a situation to be able to actually become active stakeholders and active advocates for sustainable change. And it was placing the onus on the municipal community. Why? Because it's the municipal community that is able to contact and to be able to work together with what we call now the social political helix at a local level. And the social political helix has 6 components. So we're talking about the public sector, the private sector, and the academic sector, which were first defined as the triple helix. Then the quadruple helix came into being when we're talking about the involvement also of the citizen. Then the quintuple helix came into being, where we're talking about the involvement of the cultural movement, of the capacity to stimulate an emotional response on behalf of everybody in society with regards to the challenges that we're facing. And now there's a 6th element which has come into play and has been identified, which are the landowners. Because, for example, if we're talking about, for example, water, those 5 original components of the quintuple helix could co-create plans, but very often the majority of water passing through territories is actually on private land. For example, in England, I believe the percentage is approximately 80%. So you need to involve the landowners as well at the same time. Now then, the reason why you need to involve all of those sectors is so that you can create a solid social consensus. And we have put this to the test, not just in Europe, but also in the Middle East and also in Africa, which is, as Pam said, where I've been working recently. The important thing is that in the past, there have been many attempts at citizen engagement. I mean, for example, in the 90s, we were talking about Agenda 21 at a municipal level to co-create ideas for how we create a sustainable future in the 21st century. And that was an absolute failure because it was political blah, blah. It was political nonsense. Basically, there were meetings organized in hundreds of thousands of municipalities around the world, and interested citizens did go to meetings and they were informed and they did proffer certain ideas, but they were never truly involved. They were never truly engaged. So what we demand, the people who work with me and other colleagues around the world, what we demand is that when you engage the citizen, you really engage them. You engage them not only in the co-creation, where they are equal partners with all of those other sectors that I've mentioned, the public sector, the academic sector, the private sector, the landowners, inspired by the cultural sector to become involved in the first place. But what we need to do as well is to give them a role so that that policy, instead of being the policy of a specific administration or of a specific political party, becomes their policy. It becomes their property. Now then, that means that you have to go beyond the co-creation of a policy or of a program or of a project. And you have to make sure that the ordinary, hitherto uninformed citizen also becomes an implementer of that policy. Obviously, they can't do the technical implementation if we're talking about the environment, but we don't necessarily have to talk just about the environment. We could be talking about any series of issues which are raised at a local level, upon which the future of a sustainable society depends. Be that, for example, gender equality, be that, for example, the question of ethnicity, be that the question, for example, of migration, be that the question of social conflict as a result of very differing underlying values and this increasing division between the extreme left wing and the extreme right wing, which is now occurring in Western society, and that we've seen, for example, typified obviously by people such as Trump or, for example, Boris Johnson or what have you. So implementation, how do we involve people who are not experts in implementation? By making them, first of all, the overseers of the policy. They become the guarantors of the continuity of that policy. It's been calculated that the average environmental policy, in order to be truly successful, needs to have a minimum lifetime of between 12 to 16 years. Now then, depending on the country which you live in, I mean, for example, I live in Spain. I was the mayor of a Spanish city. Our mandates only last 4 years. So you're talking possibly about 4 mandates. And that means that you're going to have changes of politicians, you're going to have changes possibly of parties. And politicians and political parties are notorious at not wanting to continue the opposition's ideas. However, if it's the property of the citizens and the citizens become the overseers of that policy, then the new government is going to find it far more difficult to actually go against the electorate, okay, who consider that policy to be theirs. They also become the communicators of that policy, not only to their own community at a broader scale, but also beyond their own community. So they actually become the regional, the national, and the international spokespeople for what they are doing. And this is something that both through EURECAT, both through the European Commission and through the United Nations, we've been very active in promoting, so that they have this role. And then finally, they have to have this role as well in the post-implementation analysis of that policy, and then the further development of policies beyond. You can't expect citizens to continually be involved over a large number of years, but you can expect citizen communities to become involved over a long period of time if they truly believe in what is being designed and what is being implemented. And that, I believe, is where we can guarantee the transition to a sustainable community. I believe that also that transition and those people who work in these local fora must be supported by objective, proven data, which is then transformed into action, which therefore obliges the scientist, the researcher, the most uncommunicative people in the entire planet to actually learn to have to communicate their ideas, to be able to get across to a general public, in order not only that the general public understand, but that they themselves, the scientists and the researchers, actually become part of the socio-political process. Scientists have to open up and understand that they are an essential element. Scientists, I say it's a bad name. I should say researchers and scientists. Okay, they have to understand and they have to assume their role as a socio-political actor as well. So we need data into action. We need, as a result of all of this, capacity development, well-defined and well-planned capacity development, which is suitable for that specific area where you're working, because cultural and political and social differences vary literally from one municipality to the next. They certainly vary from one country to the next, and obviously they vary from one continent to the next. And so therefore, it's very important that we establish systems and methodologies which are very flexible, that are not there just to prove a researcher right because he or she has come up with a new methodology, but rather how to apply those in different global areas, in different within different cultures. And most importantly as well, what we have discovered whilst we've begun this work, which we've been now undertaking over the last 10 years, is that it's essential that at the same time we address very, very strong social issues such as gender inequality. We have to ensure that all genders are represented within these local community fora. We have to ensure that those ethnic groups that very often suffer the most severe consequences of a lack of action are involved in the co-creation and co-implementation of the policies, so that they really are helping themselves. That is especially important when, for example, in my recent experience with the United Nations, and I've been working a lot in local communities, for example, in Nairobi and across Kenya and also in Somalia, you can't, as a European, go in there and say, look, this is the good idea. No, actually, it's the reverse. They know their problems. They very often know their solutions. And our job is basically to support the solutions, which are far more sensible than those which have been invented in the office of some university 3,000 miles away by somebody who's never even crossed into Africa himself or herself. So I think that that's absolutely essential. I think that, therefore, when we combine social, political, economic, and environmental issues together, when we also look as a result at the question of the Wefe nexus plus H, which means water, energy, food, ecosystems, and health, and we look at them together as an interacting forces which need to be understood. And at the same time, we look at the different social sectors that I've described as interacting forces, then we have a very, very strong basis on which to work. I'm sorry, I'm an ex-politician. I talk too much. I apologize for that.
Martin, would you like to take the floor now?
Absolutely. Gosh, I feel a little bit underqualified. I'm the only non-doctor sitting, non-PhD sitting sitting up here.
This means that you were sensible and went out and don't worry about
No, so Richard, I couldn't agree more with a lot of what you say, and I'm going to build a little bit on that. Just to take a few steps back. So as IEP, the Institute for European Environmental Policy, based here in Brussels, we're what we like to call ourselves a think do tank. So we go beyond just the creation of what I call knowledge products. So we go beyond pure research papers, knowledge briefs, policy briefs, but really also try to kind of place them strategically within the whole political process and a dialogue. And that's a very key role that we play as well. And it's something that the non-PhD and the non-doctor within the organization plays, is, you know, trying to make sure that whatever is produced is also understandable and becomes part of a larger narrative. And I think that's something that's quite quite important, because IEP, historically, we've been around for almost 5 decades here in Brussels. Well, not in Brussels, started out in Bonn, then went to the UK, then after Brexit, came back to Brussels. Now working at the heart of it and working with the usual suspects, the key stakeholders, Commission, Parliament, and the Council. But what we're also realizing is that there is that policy gap, that science policy gap, that needs to be implemented at the grassroots level. So really involving local governments, local authorities. So we also start working a lot with the Committee of the Regions, for example. Earlier this week, I was sitting up here as well. We had an event doing exactly that. So talking about how do you bridge that gap of that ivory tower that is here in Brussels, that 35,000-foot view. How do you really turn that into an enabling political and implementable environment at the local level? And I think that's very, very important. We had I'm making a bit of publicity for an event that's already happened, but it was a very interesting group of speakers that we had. We had a private sector actor, Urban Intelligence UK, who brought in very concrete innovations that they had brought using big data to make informed urban planning decisions. We had an alderman of the city of Nieuwegein in the Netherlands, who's worked with the Committee of the Regions, bringing that local perspective. We had a researcher from Eurocities, and we had a civil society representative as well. So really bringing that diverse group of stakeholders who, at the end of the day, all want the same thing. And I think that's also very important. So I would even go so far as to add on to, you know, citizen involvement. Also, we need private sector involvement. Because they're the ones that have that drive for innovation. They have a lot of times the investment capacity to implement this innovation. But what is required is that enabling environment. The enabling political environment. So I think, you know, in terms of challenges, the discussion, it always also comes down to to money at the end of the day. When we look at a lot of the EU funding instruments, funding for hardcore research, it is reasonably easy to find, and has very clear-cut outputs. You have your research paper, and that is launched, and then it kind of ends up, hopefully, ends up on a shelf, hopefully not, and something is done with it at the end of the day. Where IEP tries to place itself within Brussels is also making sure that that shelf life of research products is actually extended and becomes part of that larger narrative, as you're saying as well, which is more understandable, not only for policymakers, but it's more understandable for citizens, it's understandable for implementers, and it really becomes part of a larger picture. You go to the person on the street, talk about Fit for 55, talk about the Green Deal even, it's something that's very, very far detached. But if you talk about, okay, we can reduce emissions reductions at a city level by creating a smart app that manages street lighting systems so that they will dim if there's no one on the road, that you can manage yourself, and say if you're walking home through a dark alley, then you can actually have those lights going on. That helps in safety, that helps in energy reductions, emissions reductions, it helps with biodiversity, wildlife preservation. So there's a whole panoply of things that some small interventions can actually bring. But there needs to be that enabling environment, and local authorities need to be receptive and willing to do that, and see the bigger picture in order to kind of reach the global target. So I think, yes, I think the supranational targets are very, very important, but there needs to be that very kind of trickling down, going from that very, very upstream global agreements, coming down to the grassroots level, civil society, local authorities, where it actually is implemented and makes the difference. That's a very, very key role that research institutes can play if we do train our researchers to communicate, train our researchers to engage. I think one of the largest, having worked for research institutes for several years, a lot of times success is measured by number of publications. Success is measured by the number of citations that you have. Whereas the longer term impact pathway of a research output and research recommendations are often overlooked and often underfunded as well. I think it's a challenge that we as IEP, trying to make that do element in Think Do Tank a little bit more implementable. It's quite hard, because as a research organization, you're not an NGO. We're not the activists. We're not the campaigners. We provide evidence. We provide evidence to partners, whether it's private sector, whether it's civil society, whether it's other academia, to build evidence-based policies that will contribute to the SDG agenda and to the European Green Deal. And it's that impact pathway that still faces a very, very significant funding gap. An organization such as IEP, we tried to fit a square peg into a round hole by going under the European Commission LIFE program, which is actually aimed at NGOs. So you get a lot of NGO KPIs, whereas we then try to fit our work into it, but it becomes very, very complicated. So what we are working with a number of other think tanks here in Brussels is also looking at, okay, how can these large funders, such as the European Commission, provide that support to institutes that play a very, very key role in informing their policies and making sure that these policies are implementable, ambitious at the same time. And I think, we're in a difficult position as well, where we're looking at the elections next year in Europe, with to say it nice, a potentially volatile political shift. But it does pose a significant threat. When we look at the European Green Deal, we're saying, well, what will happen? What will happen? Frans Timmermans is gone. Von der Leyen, not sure. So the two biggest champions of the Green Deal at the very highest political levels are very unlikely to be there. So it's up to us to provide evidence to the activists, to the campaigners, to then also trickle down and cascade it down to the citizens to make the right decisions when they go to the polls at the end of the day. And that's going to ensure also that longer shelf life of the European Green Deal. As you said, these policies need that long, the 12 to 16 years. That's what you said. So, by extending it by at least another 5, at least we'll get to 2030. We'll be able to achieve targets by 2030 that will help us achieve the targets by 2050. But it's very important that that evidence that is generated by research institutions and academia is really placed in that proper narrative, in the right place, in the right time. So, no, thank you.
Thank you, Martin. Rosa, can I hand the floor over to you now?
Thank you very much. I think I'm going to build on the ideas that you have put forward already, because if we want to achieve a positive transformation or transition into a more sustainable society, one of the things or the elements that for me is key is that you cannot impose those ideas of what you think is sustainable to the citizens, where you're trying to implement policies or regulations or a scientific idea or project. And the only way for that to happen is to have citizens that have the right information, that have the right education on what the issues are, and not to treat citizens as if they were mere recipients of information. We need active engagement of communities and active communities, as you have put forward, from the local level. And this is not easy to achieve. If we go into the idea of the quintable helix that you were mentioning, for instance, when we talk about where is the role of academics or academia in that helix, we see academics working with governments on one side, with the private sector on another side, and with citizens in another side, but not often with all of them at the same time. And we could be perfectly a nexus between them and facilitate that communication and that engagement between them. But when I go and work with communities, and this happened very recently, early this year, I was working in a school with a community who wanted to reduce the level of air pollution caused by traffic and so on and so forth. And a group of us went and asked them, what is it that you want? What's the situation? And so on and so forth. And it's, to some extent, it surprised me, but to some other, it didn't. That the view that they have of universities and academia in general is what they had experienced up to that moment, where they said, yeah, universities come, do their things, finish their projects, gather their data, and then leave. And then we don't hear anything else from them. And that is not the way that research should work. If you want the projects to be successful, they need to be maintained over a long period of time. And the way the funding is allocated, whether it is at the local, national, or the international or supranational level, you have projects being funded for 2, 3, 5 years, and the researchers will present a report, will write some papers, and nobody looks what happens after that report has been completed. What happens with the project? Is the community affected? If there is a community affected and it's not just a desk exercise, actually still benefiting from it? What is the real benefit? that is not really looked into. So we need a different way of funding a scheme that has a much more flexible approach to create that continuity. We need to stop taking the communities as a research object, and we need to empower them and give them ownership of the project, because it's for them, and the funding should reach them. And this is also something that I see in the wording of how projects gets allocated, the conditions or pre-requirements, who can participate in these projects. There are certain schemes at European level as well, where you can have funding between university researchers, but if you want to engage civil society organizations, NGOs, communities, they can be partnered in your project, but they cannot receive funding for the project. So if you want to benefit the community, you need to allocate funding in tangible things that society, community can experience and can see as a lasting legacy as well, to have that continuity over time. So that's extremely important for me. And also how the success of a project is measured. We talk about indicators, and indicators should not be the number of papers that you can write. And that's the way, unfortunately, academics are judged these days. So we have to juggle the pressures of being judged in our career for how much money do we get for research and how many publications we got. So if you need to be writing papers, you're not going to be working with the communities that need you, and the ones where you can have actually a positive impact. And you need to listen to them, you need to learn from them, and then you need to talk back to them in a language that they can understand. Which I think Richard, you, well, both of you have made mention of. And this is not an easy task when we talk about sustainability, because the issues that and the challenges that we face are very complex. But if we tackle them with experiences and expertise from more than one field, and with an approach that enables the communities to build from what we have provided them, it can work, and it works from at least my experiences. The local level, I think, is the right way to go. Both in the area of energy, food poverty, and the like. We had not that long ago, European commissioners saying that there was no food poverty issue in Europe, because the issue of food poverty was only looked as an issue of food security, and we have no issue in theory with food supplies, but there is an issue about who has access to that food. And with the crisis that we are facing, the cost of living crisis, or however you want to call it, that is very visible. We cannot limit ourselves to talk to citizens and communities only in the planning stage of a project. And then once they have answered a survey, they are not engaged anymore. Nobody asked them if the project has responded to what they said in the survey. And I have also even seen, for instance, when the municipal level do not have the expertise to even go to their own communities and ask what they want. I've seen a survey on a climate strategy for a municipality, where there were more questions asking for the personal data of the citizens than questions about climate change. And obviously it's like somebody actually showed me the survey and said, why do they want so many private data that has nothing to do with climate change or how to implement a strategy for this local area? So there needs to be a change of mindset from those who provide the funding at international, national level, those who have the capacity to implement the rulings at the national and local level in particular, and from academics in the way that we engage with the communities to provide information and to gather information from them. And we need to all work together. We have more than 2,000 local authorities who have declared a climate emergency. So it's not something that we can wait to do. And it's not something where the local level and the citizens can be ignored. And I will stop here. Thank you.
Thank you, Rosa. We are now open to questions. Do we have any from those of you in the room to begin with? No? Okay. Martin, since you spoke first, would you like to?
No, thanks, Rosa. I think what some of the things that a number of things that you said were very, very insightful, and I think you hit it right on the nose when you said that there is a need for platforms, dialogues between those different stakeholders. At the risk of again peddling my own wares, IEP does have we manage a platform called Think 2030 where we do exactly that. We bring IEP, the Think 2030 platform actually brings together private sector actors, civil society, academia, foundations, think tanks from across Europe, to really develop and disseminate policy recommendations to the EU institutions and down to the national level as well, which anecdotally has been very well received by the European Commission, because we make their job easier in consultations. They don't need to listen to everyone individually. We do that for them. We find that highest common denominator where we can actually start from and build upon that rather than focusing on differences. Because I think one of the big things as well is that we need to be brave enough also to get out of the comfort zone and to not only be preaching to the converted. I think it's always very good to bring as many stakeholders around the table and dialogue with each other rather than all of them speaking to one person, to be able to find that compromise, to be able to find that common ground where we can build towards. So I think that's something quite important, and it's something that it's still quite nascent, but it is something that it's the future. It's the way forward to bring all of these together rather than creating communication strategies, advocacy strategies, campaigns, each from our own individual silos. I think that's very important. And I think, the role of consultation and feedback as well is very, very important when we talk about research. So yeah, what did I do with the information that I got from you? How have I implemented that? How have I shaped that into something tangible that is of benefit to you and benefit to society as a whole? An example that was actually mentioned at a previous event, I believe it was the city of Songdo in Korea, which was entirely built to be as a smart city, but they didn't listen to their stakeholders. They didn't listen to what was exactly needed. So billions were spent into building this supposedly smart city, and no one moved there because however smart it was, it didn't respond to what the actual citizen needed. So I think, you know, it's also very important in that respect to make sure that whatever you do is also responsive to needs of the people on the ground, is communicated, and is then translated into actions.
Richard, you said you wanted to have a go as well.
Oh, yes. So, Rosa, I agree with you 100%. Everything that you were saying about, for example, researchers parachuting into communities, etc., etc. I agree with you completely. I would like to say that I think FP7, Horizon 2020, Horizon Europe is a total waste of time and money. 100%. It should be ripped up and started all over again. It's designed basically to maintain researchers and academics employed. It is not designed to actually create tangible action. If you want to convince people that something's going to happen, you've got to give them tangible results on the ground. Research, as it is done at the moment, as European funded research, as it is structured at the moment, does not produce that. We're failing. We're failing as a society in general. We can talk about the SDGs. I mean, I've spent the last year basically in Nairobi hearing a large group of very mediocre, highly overpaid bureaucrats talking about SDGs and talking about the need to do this, that, and the other, and they can't even be bothered to get out of their office and actually see the reality around them in Nairobi, as I was describing to Rosa and Pam before the conference began. We're failing as a society to inform. We're failing as a society to educate. We are now in a situation where political decisions are very often taken on social media, where a person doesn't have to express himself or herself beyond 160 characters. We are living in a world where analysis and informed debate has died. And I think we have to face up to these realities, because otherwise, talking about a sustainable transformation is fine in circles like this. I attend, well, I don't attend as many as I used to, but I mean, I speak at a lot of conferences, and I've been doing this now for the last, I don't know, 16, 17 years, nonstop. And I hear the same thing time after time and time after again, but nothing changes. Absolutely nothing changes. It just gets worse. For example, you were saying something which is very interesting about the economy is very important. No, it's not the economy that's important. It's the establishment of the priorities that are important. And to establish priorities, you have to culturally, emotionally stimulate people to understand what really are the priorities. And more than anything, you need to learn what the priorities are from the people on the ground, from the people who are suffering the consequences of our total failure to act effectively. And I'm not saying as the research sector or as a political sector, I'm saying as a global community, we're failing, absolutely 100%. I think that also there's a time to start saying we need to absolutely take away this enormous reliance on the politics of the nation state. Yeah, nation state politics has nothing to do with global sustainability. It's actually probably one of the principal creators of the problems that we're facing at the moment, together with corporate interest. And it's like, for example, I mean, I've had to speak at numerous COPs, and every time I say, I really hate being here talking at an event that is being sponsored by those corporate interests that are actually creating the problems we're trying to discuss here. It's hypocrisy, and people are not calling this out. So I think that we have to go right back to the ground level, go back to some very, very basic ethical, moral, and social issues, because otherwise sustainable transition is not going to happen. I mean, there's a number of massive great elephants in the room. For example, demography. Climate change wouldn't be a problem if there's massive population growth. And, I mean, but who's the politician who's going to say to people, you can't have more babies? I mean, for example, I was working as a journalist in Afghanistan and India in the 80s, and the population of India at that time was 750 million. It's now 1.5 billion. That's not sustainable, guys. That's one of the reasons we have this problem. But who's the politician who's going to go out and say, it's been tried and it's never been very successful? Okay, but we have to face the realities of what we are as a species, what we are as a global community, and what the real problems are. You said we all want to resolve these problems. That is totally wrong. The politicians, the only thing that the politician wants to do is to win the next election. Therefore, it's one of the reasons why we never get continual policies, because a politician wants results, visible results, before the next election, so that he can go to the next election and say, look what I've done. He doesn't give a damn beyond that date marked in his calendar for the next elections. Okay. For example, corporates, it's just the greenwashing and the blue washing that goes on and blah, 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 blah. But you can't see any corporate interest these days talking without them mentioning the environment and what have you. And it's just become another publicity campaign. Yeah, but it doesn't mean anything. Nobody holds these people accountable for what they're really doing. Nobody holds anybody accountable anymore. So, I mean, it may sound a little bit depressing. I'm actually an optimist. It may not sound it, but I'm actually an optimist. But I do believe that what will happen as a result of climate change in the next 30 years, with massive shifts of population from one region to another, is that nationalism and corporatism are going to suffer consequences as well. And that does give us the opportunity, perhaps, to return to a far more principled way of taking decisions in our community, because all of this is really based on how do we take decisions. And it has to be, at the end, bottom up. It has to come from the people who suffer the problems to then receive the help. Discuss.
Rosa, yes, would you like to respond?
Yes, of course. So I would like to think that I'm a little bit more positive than you are in terms of believing that not all the corporations are like that. Many are, but the political environment and the economic environment has a lot to do with how things.
Richard, remember your microphone.
But yeah, it is true that things need to change in that regard, and one of the things that can be done in that aspect is precisely give citizens that power. And the problem that we have is that at the moment the political sphere at the local level in many occasions does not have the power to change things as much as they would like to. And I have seen this happening in both in Spain and in the UK, where the local citizens and the local councils vote for something and they are overruled by the national government. So in matters that where the locals have the knowledge, that power should not be taken from them. And I have seen this in environmental aspects, in energy in particular, where you have your citizens against things like fracking, and then the national government saying we are going for fracking, and you have people saying that they do not want certain petrol drilling, oil drilling in their sea waters, and the national government going into the sea waters. I remember now a case in the coast of the Canary Islands a few years back where this happened. And actually there was so much social protest against it that the company itself decided we are not going for it. It was not worth the effort of making an investment on drilling when they knew they had the whole local community against them. In which environment are they going to work? And this is happening. Well, this was a number of years ago, at least 5, probably 8 now. But this is happening up and down all the countries now. So there is an opportunity for change here, but deeper change than the one I think we are prepared to do. And here at the European level, there is more opportunity to make that happen. And I don't see, I think if Europe wants to be much more connected to citizens and not to be isolated and be a top-down approach, as it's been accused many times, it needs to start approaching Horizon and many other things in a different way. And just to give you an example, which is practically agreeing with what you're saying, that the engagement with citizens aspect of Horizon is separating from the main funding streams. And you have the so-called missions. You have a climate mission, I think is I took note, ocean mission, cities mission, and soil missions. And then there is a cancer mission. And they are supposedly designed to achieve citizen engagement. And when you read on the website, this is on the Commission's website, that the roadmap for the transition is going to be drafted by selected experts with some input from citizens. And it sounds to me like the whole, I'm going to gather some data from you and then I'm going to do everything myself because I'm the expert, I've got the knowledge. As its citizens do not know anything. And that needs to change. So I think there is a lot of opportunities, and since we are here, I think it's a good call-up point for those who can listen or want to listen.
I think it's actually very important. One thing is that, you know, we talk about citizens as if they're the angels and the victims. Careful. The citizens are those who vote for what they get. I think that what we do have is an enormous problem at a global scale with regards to education. We don't educate people to think. We educate people to pass exams, to get diplomas. So don't worry about the PhD. Really, don't worry about it. I mean, what we're doing is that we are not educating people to care, because nobody is interested in having a load of citizens caring and wanting to be involved. That would put a lot of people's noses out. So as far as I'm concerned, education is actually the first step, but it's a very long step. The question is, do we have time? I don't know. I believe we're very, very late. But really, if we're going to have a society where citizens, and we are all citizens, when citizens can really, truly participate and demand a more open form of government and a more open form of decision making, which would guarantee the continuity that I was mentioning right at the beginning of this event, we have to educate, and we don't educate in that way. And I'm not talking just about Europe. I'm talking beyond Europe as well. I mean, basically, we have when we take a child and we take them to school, they are learning what the status quo wants them to learn. And God help you if you ask too many questions. Okay, and don't even think about analyzing at the moment. And I mean, this is a massive problem that we have. And I think that a lot of what we're facing, for example, with regards to the environment, but also with regards to all forms of sustainable society, come from the fact that we really have not educated our populations to either question anything, but also to resolve.
I think one of the difficulties we've got, looking at it from the point of view of citizens, you all three of you are talking about empowering the citizens the citizens being involved, etc., the citizens making decisions. I've got a particular interest in nuclear energy. And I can remember talking to a particular group of people and asking the questions about nuclear energy and their view and opinion. And oh yes, we would like to ban nuclear energy. Okay, what would happen if we built a new nuclear power station a few miles away? Oh, that would be a good idea. And the difference there was the impact on the local economy in terms of there being no job opportunities at all in the region. So yes, it was going to bring construction work. The nuclear power station would then bring very high grade, very high level employment into the region, which would stimulate the economy. But they didn't want nuclear energy at national level. So I think sometimes a difficulty you have is that you get a fragmentation of view. How do you get the consistency in terms of a view that we need for the sustainable transition? How do we get those consistent policies in place that we need for the transition to be effective? So I'll just throw that out for consideration. I also agree very, very much with you that funding is a political decision by the funders in many, many instances. As an evaluator of various different funding programs, I've been on the receiving end of the comment, no, we can't do that. It needs a political decision, even though we have said that's the best program to achieve the best benefit. So there are things that I agree with in what you've been saying, but there are things that I do disagree. I do agree that we need to establish values and norms in order to then develop the effective sustainable transitions, but that is extremely difficult to do when you're dealing with fragmentation of views by citizens and you're dealing with fragmentation of the responses that they make. Are there any questions from the floor at this point? Any online?
Okay, so one is, I'm reading them out, so apologies. Starting from the point that the citizens are the overseers of any policy in order to anchor said policy, can we then not also level the playing field of actors and stakeholders by looking at all those as also citizens? And then do you want one by one or in a bunch?
Respond to that one.
Didn't catch the full question. Can you say it again? I'm sorry.
Of course. Starting from the point that the citizens are the overseers of any policy in order to anchor said policy, can we then not also level the playing field of actors and the stakeholders by looking at all those as also citizens?
Sure. Yeah. I mean, that the short answer, yes. Yes, we could. The whole thing about the, leveling the playing field. I mean, this is discussed a lot. Basically, nobody is an expert of everything. So, people, we live in a very specialized society. So, we bring the expertise where it's needed to who requires it. Okay, and then a decision is taken. It has to be a very broad consensus. The essential word here is consensus. The overseeing then by all of the stakeholders guarantees that continuity because it's something which would be the property of everybody else, based on an awareness that is based on objective fact. There was something that I was thinking about when Pam, you were talking, and also Rosa, you were talking about the this rejection of atomic power and what have you. Very often, what we find is that we face the opposite. That, for example, people are in favor of wind power, but they don't want a wind farm in their municipality. I mean, this is one of the problems that we have, is that human beings are extremely selfish. Yeah. I mean, I love human beings, but they are very, very, very selfish. So they are fine with wind power. They are fine with X, Y, and Z, as long as it doesn't happen in their municipality. But yeah, fine, you pass it over to the next one. That's not a problem. I mean, and that is something that, again, I think results from a lack of education. And I think that, partly it's human nature that we're confronting here, but it's something that we do have to overcome. The leveling of the playing field will not change human nature. We are egocentric beings. But having said that, it does at least move us in a far more dynamic and dialogue-oriented way of thinking. The problem is that people don't enter into dialogues anymore. I mean, for example, how many times have you been in an argument with somebody and you've changed your opinion? Yeah, we talk, we voice our opinions, but we're not very good at listening as a species. So I think that, education, I always come back to education, and it's like, we have to educate people to listen. We have to educate people to compromise. We have to educate people to come to some form of agreement. The problem is, and Pam, I mean, you said this could take a very long time. We haven't got the time. I think we're too late for that when we're talking, for example, about the environmental situation, about climate change. I think we are definitely too late.
Then also the next question, two questions are also directed at you, Richard, and it might relate to that, where you dived in. So the question is, if you could explain why we are failing, and is it maybe because we look at the wrong things, or if there's no implementation of the agreements? And then also there is one follow-up question, where it's about progress, and basically, if no progress means we need to dissolve parliamentary democracy.
Oh no, what did the footy? No. All I'm saying is that parliamentary democracy, hey, where it exists, because I mean, we're having a very European discussion here, because it's like, I've lived in a lot of countries where parliamentary democracy would be sort of like a utopia. I don't want to get rid of parliamentary democracy per se. What I'm saying is that political parties have hijacked parliamentary democracy. For example, in the UK or in Spain, they don't represent their communities. They represent their political parties. Political parties have become corporations whose benefits are votes. And they've almost lost sight of why they really exist. Okay, so that is why I'm saying that there needs to be a political change from representative to more open forms of government. I think that political parties the existence of them can certainly be questioned. I think that if we were in a situation where citizens will elect somebody who represents them as a community, and that when you go to that elected assembly at whatever level, what they're doing is that they're not representing a political party, they're representing that area, we would be a lot better off. Okay. Sorry, I've forgotten the rest of the question. Sorry about that.
Well, we started with that. That was about while we are failing.
Oh, okay.
Yes.
The reason why are we failing? I mean, hey, are we? I mean, I'm a doctor of political science. I'm not a Nobel Prize winner yet, but the reason why we're failing, why I think we're failing, is because I'm 62. I know, I don't look it, I know, but I'm 62. In my lifetime, I haven't seen any change at all. So basically, we talk a lot. I mean, we have, for example, you go to COP, or I mean, for example, there was a UN water conference in March in the UN. Nothing came out of it. Nothing ever does. Okay. And for example, I was in the Bled Strategic Forum in Slovenia 3-4 weeks ago before I went to Nairobi, and we were talking about the use of diplomats, and I was saying diplomats don't serve for anything because their job is to not say anything that might possibly, ruin the status quo or the atmosphere or what have you. It's time, I think, that we actually started being far less diplomatic. But the reason why I say failure is because in my lifetime, instead of things getting better, things are 200 times worse than they were when I was at school or when I was at university. So obviously we're failing. We're failing as a global society. I mean, politically, we were better off in the 60s and 70s. We were more optimistic, my generation. Well, I went to university. I started university in 79. We were far more optimistic then, and with reason, than now. I mean, you look at the state of the political state of the world at the moment, and what is there to be optimistic about? And also, if you look at the level of politician at the moment, name me one international statesman or statespersons, I'm sorry, who should actually be there. They're very, very few. I mean, one of the last ones retired basically because I think she was stressed out, which was the Prime Minister of New Zealand. The Prime Minister of Finland was absolutely excellent, and of course was kicked out by basically very misogynistic opposition. I mean, we're going backwards. Trump could come back. Look at the British government. Look at the rise of the extreme right wing in Europe. That was unthinkable when I was at university. There was no way we could have imagined that was going to happen again. It's happened again. So I think we failed. Sorry about that.
I thought you said you were an optimist, Richard.
I know. Fine, all sorts of things, except.
I have 2 more. Okay. So this relates a bit more to academia and the dialogue. It's a long question, so I can repeat. So first of all, thank you for these invigorating discussions. Where research that agrees totally with all of you, but as part of the academic system that you very constructively described before, can meet people or be part of networks who want to contribute to the sustainable transition at the ground level. Information of this kind very rarely comes into academic environment. So how can we foster, or build up on this, how can we foster the dialogue between academia and politicians in real life at larger scale, not only in certain circles and not just in theory?
There's no easy answer for that. I think one of the main issues that we have in academia these days to foster that dialogue, to build networks and to work with both communities and politicians and the like, is the way that success is defined when you are in academia and how academics work. You have a situation in which most academics, I know there is difference between countries, but when you decide to join academia, at least in my case, and that shows you how maybe idealistic I am, I joined academia because I wanted to make a contribution to change someone's life for the better, to make them a person that will go out as an independent adult to do whatever they thought that it was better for them, but also for society. And the type of environment in which we have to work is very toxic. We have built a system of universities and academia in which in certain countries, we all rely on temporary contracts, and money, unfortunately, has a lot to say on this, underpaid, or even the conditions for you to access a permanent contract or become professor one day, if you dream about it, is you need to get funding and got research projects. I have seen people losing their jobs because the target in terms of millions of pounds that they were requested to achieve was not achieved in their probation. So when you live in an environment like that, an academic is constantly over too many pressures to survive between their teaching and their research. So it's difficult to maintain an engagement with the communities. There are many networks that could be used because universities, colleges, schools are in local communities. They are in towns and cities, not that many in rural areas, but the only reports that you see linking the universities with the communities are how universities contribute to the economic development of the area because of the students that they bring. And obviously, students means that they are going to spend money in the local community. But I listen to people, and you also listen how the citizens of those communities on occasions see how or say that they have been invaded, that the only thing that is being built in their communities is student accommodation, that there's no parking spaces, that they cannot move because they got invaded. And you have places where they have said no to more university development. So when you want to engage really with a community, you need to listen what that community wants and what that community needs. And you need to try and not to measure the success of the university or the local community where they are in monetary terms. And when we're talking about sustainability, sustainability has the typical 3 or 4 pillars: economic, social, and environmental, and the cultural one. And we tend to focus, unfortunately, in the economic and the environmental, and the social bit is many times forgotten. It's about decreasing inequalities. And if the university representatives from different disciplines had the opportunity to talk to those communities, not just with council representatives, but with civil society organizations, go and visit the impoverished areas that are in every single place where you can go, and think about how can we improve the situation in this local community, those dialogues will be much easier. But you don't usually see academia going to a place and say, how can I help you? Is how can I use this place as a research area, and how can I get my research output published? So there is a need for a change of mindset and a need for a change of structure and definition of success. That will be my answer. And it's not easy.
Martin, you.
Yeah, I think, yeah, again, you're hitting it right on the nose, Rosa. I would say, join a think tank. No, in terms of where a think tank, for example, has an edge, is that we also try to focus on the impact pathway. So where is that, what is that step between a research output, so a knowledge product, and the actual implementation on the ground? And that sometimes it requires that change in mindset, not only from the researcher, but also from the funder perspective. I think, and this comes also back to what you were saying, Pam, is that, we're constantly running after donors, pandering to what they identify as priorities, that we don't have the time or the capacity or the bandwidth to speak with donors and say, this should be your priority. And here's the evidence why this should be your priority. And that's kind of the first step as well, that it's it's almost a cycle where your evidence from your research identifies gaps, which policies should then attempt to fill, which would then inform funding decisions, which then inform more research. So I think it's that cycle which needs to be perpetuated, but because of that bandwidth, because of that pressure that researchers are on to constantly delivering, looking for something that gets you as many citations as possible. The fact that research very often is behind paywalls, I think as well, is not accessible, is also a barrier for the research uptake, to actually be brought in. So I think, there needs to be that mindset, but there also needs to be that focus, I think, from the academic, from the employer perspective. Train your researchers to be able to communicate this, train your researchers to be able to engage at that very local level and look at that impact pathway much further beyond just the moment of publication and citation. That's what's very, very important.
I think it's also essential, and I'm going to go back to the basics again, that allow the people who very often researchers want to investigate to become researchers. We still live in a world where basically in most countries, if your family do not have money, if you do not come from a certain social class, you don't become a researcher. Yeah, I mean, it's very much a middle class or upper middle class field. So therefore, I think that one of the ways that we can get across the hurdle of, how do we get, real insight with regards to research into community problems, is by ensuring as well that we have a system which can exist. Because when I was a child living in England, you didn't have to pay for your university fees. You could go to university if you came from a poor family. We've lost that. It's another reason why perhaps things are worse than they were before. But why can't ethnic minorities get into university as much? Why is it that, for example, low salary families, their children do not go to university because they can't afford it? And yet those are the people who could probably be not only fine researchers, but probably as well highly inspired and motivated researchers. And I think that we're missing that.
Thank you. Do we have any more questions? No. We are approaching the end of our session. I'm going to ask our three panelists to give me one sentence as a message, a takeaway from this afternoon's session. Richard, one sentence. As a takeaway, a message as a takeaway. Use your microphone though, please, Richard.
Okay, so we need to create social consensus. In order to create that, we need to create education for all. Stop.
Thank you.
I would say create systems and environments where research is not forced to operate in a vacuum, but where it is actually implementable and focusing on the impact pathways that it could possibly have.
Thank you. Rosa?
Building on that, I will say that we cannot forget that the sustainability transition happens to citizens, and citizens live in the local level, so the local level should be a priority for everyone.
Thank you. Thank you to our panelists this afternoon, and thank you to our audience for coming. Thank you.